Evening, everyone. I'm just going to get that up now. I've got my headphones on because I'm going to start off with some. Before we start going through comments and what I want to talk about, I heard this today. I saw a clip of it today. I didn't actually hear the actual program. Quite spectacular. I just want to. I must play this. Let's just get rid of this. So this is Esther McVeigh. Before I play it, this is Esther McVeigh. For those who don't know, she is the so-called Minister for Common Sense. Now, that's not her official title. She's just a minister without portfolio with a various degree of non-jobs. But she was effectively brought into cabinet. Rishi Sunak was like getting rid of a lot of the loonies. And so it was felt that to balance the cabinet out, he had to bring one or two in. So this is her talking about the great work that Rishi Sunak has done turning the economy around. And I want you to pay attention to the reaction of the audience here. I'm just going to have to sort that out. Hopefully you can hear it.
But people have got to now get behind Rishi Sunak, who actually inherited a difficult set of circumstances, and say, yes, he has turned the economy round. That is turning round now. When you talk about inflation...
just gone into recession?
No.
The UK's just gone into a recession.
Yeah, okay.
So hopefully we heard that. And this is the problem they're in at the moment. This is why recession's always bad for every government, right? I'm going to take that off because I don't need that anymore. Recession is always stunningly bad for any government. It's what ultimately snookered the last Labour government, even though they dealt with it fairly well. And the last one was a normal recession. In other words, you had this big period of growth. Basically, it's what Gordon Brown said would never happen. He said, oh, no more. Do you remember that? No more boom and bust. So then we had this boom and then we had a bust. But that is quite normal because remember, all a recession is 2 quarters of contraction. And what is that contraction? Your economy got smaller than it was before. You're only comparing with yourself. So growth, when people compare growth of different countries and things like that, it's like you're only comparing with yourself. But this recession was very different because we didn't ever have, because you can imagine you have a large period of growth, some bubble then bursts, and then your economy contracts a bit. Your economy may still be larger. Like after the banking crisis, the UK economy was still larger than it was a few years ago, like when Labour took over. They left the economy better in real terms. But this one is very different. It's come after years and years of stagnation. Years of stagnation, like with growths of like nothing. And then, so when they say technically, they're calling it a technical recession, which apparently is somehow different to an actual recession. The only sense in which it's a technical recession, I'm happy to use the term technical recession to mean a recession that shouldn't have bloody well happened because it was avoidable. But, but this is why it's so dangerous to the Tories now. Try and think of what the Tories have got. And this is part of what I want to talk about today. Try to think of what the Tories have got to focus on for this year, for the election. Think of the different policy areas. They've tried to focus on immigration. I keep saying fatal because it's Reform UK's stomping grounds. And they're losing ground to them. They can't beat Reform UK on immigration unless the only way the Tories could actually beat Reform UK on immigration would be to get immigration down to what everyone, all anti-immigration people would accept are very low levels, right? And for some of those people, that has to be negative, because there's some of these people who don't want any net migration at all. They don't really want migration, but they're probably very few in number. So they can't win. They're trying to sort of make immigration not a policy or a series of policies, but a culture war. Well, Reform UK are a party of protest. They'll win it all day long. It's a bit like if Labour tried to engage in a sort of like a left-wing version or a liberal version of a culture war with the Green Party. The Green Party would win all day long. The Lib Dems would win all day long if they wanted to engage. So it's never going to happen. But you look at anything. So all they had was the economy, and the reason why all they had, she called it technical and shallow. Yeah, well, it is. Well, it's technical. It's a recession. A recession is a recession. It is shallow in that the next time we find out what the quarterly results are, we'll be out of it. No one's suggesting that this is going to be like the ones from years ago. But again, there was no reason to have a recession at all. If your growth is basically nothing, how can you not sustain a growth of nothing? It's different. If your economy is really racing away, you know, like it did, for example, in the noughties, like the global economy did, you know, with lots and you know, lots of economies, including our own, should have paid a bit more bloody attention to what was going on with the subprime market, for example. So there's always these things, but there's always a reason. Like whenever you have a recession, there's always a, ooh, you should have kept your eye on that. But there was nothing like that here. It was just squeezing our own economy. It was just the Tories making it harder and harder to do business, harder and harder to get jobs, harder and harder to find staff for the business owners, harder and harder to afford the cost of living, which also affects your ability to be productive or to find jobs. You know, if you go, oh, there's this job in the next town, I can't afford to move there. So you can't do the job. Or I can't afford to travel there. Can't do the job. You know, the Tories have made it harder to find work, harder as a business to keep going, harder as a business to find staff. But anyway, I just see Mac's videos about Reform making out they're the third biggest party now. My gammon dad has fallen for it, frustrating the lie unchallenged. No, I haven't. I will point out, though, so let's get rid of Esther. Let's get rid of her. Put these back up. Here's what I will point out about Reform UK. So I've probably done it in the video already. But as we're going over the by-elections as well and then looking ahead to this year, Reform UK did a lot better than they have in the by-elections. Now, if we go through a few like deliberate misconceptions that people are trying to push about the by-elections. First of all, someone put it in the comment earlier on, talking about, turnout was well down. No, it wasn't. Turnout was very decent for by-elections. There were a couple of by-elections last year that were very high by the standards of by-elections. There was Selby was a very high turnout. I'm trying to think of there was another one last year that had like a turnout in the 40% as well. I'm not sure which one. It may have been one of the Lib Dem ones. I can't remember. But generally speaking, by-elections have turnouts in like the 30s. So to get it in the late 30s was actually a decent turnout. But in by-elections, it's always, because as I say, you think about three types of voter. There's three types of voter who vote for Westminster seats. The first group are the ones, and these are most people, or a large chunk of them anyway. They want to vote for the government. They don't want to vote for a local MP. They're not bothered about that. They sort of see that your local MP, okay, there's a difference between a hard-working and a lazy MP, but how do you tell the difference? What they're voting for is the government. That's what they're voting for. So they're voting mostly for either Labour or the Conservatives, unless they're voting tactically to try to nobble one or the other of them. Those people don't really turn up to by-elections because you can't determine the government. So they're the ones who are absent. Other type of voter are the ones who just, like myself, who will always feel that you should make your voice heard, that you can't complain about anything that politicians do if you do not engage yourself. And the bare minimum engagement is just walking down the end of the street, picking up a pencil, putting a cross in a box, posting it in a little slot. So the people who will just always vote. But then you've got the ones who may vote, who will definitely vote in by-elections because they want their voice amplified. And these are people who will make the protest vote. They'll send the message. There are Conservative voters who, in Wellingborough and Kingswood, some of those Conservative voters who voted Reform UK, for example, they will absolutely vote Conservative in the election. They're just trying to tell they may have voted someone else. They may have voted Lib Dem. They may have voted Labour as a message, you know, but they're essentially trying to send a message to the Conservatives, we're not happy with you. But come the general election, they will vote Conservative. So you've got the protest votes as well. Reform UK should have gathered loads of protest votes. And just to show you the difference, In 2015, UKIP in Wellingborough got about 20% of the vote. I think it was 19 point something, right? They got about 20% of the vote. In that particular year, they actually got slightly more than Labour. It sort of looks the same on the chart, but I think they were in second place, I believe, in Wellingborough in 2015. Now, that was a general election. In a general election, the protest vote is still there, but it is much smaller as a proportion. So basically what I'm saying is UKIP got about 20% of the vote in Wellingborough in 2015. Had there been a by-election a few months before that general election in Wellingborough, UKIP would have got way more than 20%. And yet Reform, in a by-election where they should be able to get more because they are a protest vote, they should be able to get more. They couldn't even get up to UKIP's level. And then the same thing in Kingswood as well. Kingswood is not as strong a Leave area. It's not really big. Like Wellingborough is a really big Leave area. So, of course, you would expect Reform UK to do well, and they haven't. In Kingswood, trickier. And yet they still didn't get up to the UKIP 2015 level. At the end of the day, like, although Reform UK have got a larger share of the votes than they did in the by-elections last year, if they cannot get up to 2015 UKIP levels, they're just... That's not to say the Tories shouldn't fear them, because there's going to be a lot of tight contests. And Reform UK, they only have to get a few thousand votes, and it'll cost the Tories dozens of seats. John Hart saying, it appears some political commentators who believe the general election will be in autumn are not taking into account that Sunak's government may not last until then. So, yeah, so there are political commentators who, like me, are going, yeah, they're planning on May. I'm not saying it's definitely May. I will keep pointing that out. I'm not saying it's definitely May. What I'm saying is they are definitely aiming for May. But the thing that tells me they're not totally committed, they're announcing the budget in early March. That gives them 3 weeks to gauge public reaction. And if they decide they don't like that public reaction, to go long. So I actually, it's up and down as to whether this week means they have to go shorter or longer, right? But there are some political commentators like me who are thinking they're aiming for May, and there are other ones who are going, no, they're aiming for autumn, right? And some of them are perfectly clever. I'm not saying that they're all thick as mince. What I will say is that any journalist pushing that is either, a Tory shill, or they are missing things. Because let us go down the list. I'll probably miss some out, but let's go down the list of things that tell me the Tories are not planning on autumn. First of all, they issued the national insurance cuts in January. Why do that if you're going for an autumn general election? It's because they wanted people to see the take-home pay go up effectively before May. Because the budget will be announced next month, but it doesn't come online. It doesn't start until April, which means you don't get to see any impacts of tax cuts in the budget until your May pay packet. Well, if they go for the election 2nd of May, you're not going to see it at all, are you? So it was to let people see the impact of it from May. It made no difference to have those national insurance cuts, which cost money. Bringing them out a few months early cost them money, billions. So it made no sense to do that if they were planning on an autumn election, if it was always going to be autumn. Second thing is the fact that, as I say, Conservative campaign headquarters is absolutely heaving. It's at full scale, full tilt. Isaac Levidow, the campaign strategist, has been working full-time every day there. That won't be cheap. But also, I've been reporting recently, well, I have not reported, Political Picks on Twitter has. Isaac Levidow is in and out of Downing Street all the time. I was asking one commentator today who thinks it's autumn. He thinks it might even be December. And he's quite clever. And I was saying, what's the explanation for Isaac Levidow being in and out of Downing Street on a daily basis then? And he said, oh, it's a long campaign. I don't buy that. That's rubbish. It doesn't matter whether Isaac Levidow's talking to Sunak personally or talking to his aides in Downing Street, his other advisors. It makes no difference. There doesn't need to be a physical meeting every single day if the election's still like 8 months away. That makes no sense. He's on the phone. You can do video conferencing. You can get a secure line. Don't give me this, oh, someone might tap in. No, you can get a secure line. You could ring him on the phone. You could email him. You could video conference. You would do that. You wouldn't make him make the trek to Downing Street every single day. And you can't argue it's just because there were by-elections this week, because they weren't fighting those by-elections this week. There was no attempt to win these by-elections at all. I don't know whether people saw. Someone came out with a poll earlier this week. They did admit in it it was not a method that's really used these days. But they came out with this result that suggested that that Wellingborough was very close and the Conservatives were just going to shade it. Well, look at the results. Where are they? Look at the results. There was no way that it was. If it was close, the Conservatives would have been hammering on the doors, right? It was never close. But it does show you the danger of polls that are not using the correct methods. It shows you how difficult polling is. You know, if you get the methods wrong, there we go. Aubrey saying technical recession occurs where there's a growing economy that has marginal reductions in the economic parameters for the requisite number of quarters. Well, we haven't really had much growth, have we? We've had basically 0% growth last year. Now, granted, the forecast was for... Now, this is an interesting point. So the forecast was that our economy would contract by 1%. At the beginning of 2023, the IMF, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure the IMF were forecasting we'd get like 1% contraction. So they were actually... Now, you can get 1% contraction every year without a recession, but they were saying that the economy would shrink. In the end, it's basically not done anything. It's zero. With rounding errors, you can probably make out it was 0.1% over the year, but it's basically zero. The economy is exactly the same size it was at the beginning of 2023, or at the end of 2023. Now, the interesting thing is, James saying that 0.3% growth. I don't really. Do you mean that a forecast? That would have been a later forecast. Then I'm specific when I talk about forecasts, because forecasts are amended all the time. Obviously, you know, it's not you have to keep adjusting it with known figures. But at the beginning of 2023, it was definitely not for growth. So when Rishi Sunak made his 5 pledges at the beginning of 2023, and one of them was to grow the economy, I remember saying, you do know the forecast is not for growth, don't you? But the other thing is this year's forecast. So at the start of 2024, which we still sort of are, the forecast is not even for 1% growth. It's something like, I should have looked it up. It's about 0.6, 0.7% growth forecast for this year. Now, if we argue that the IMF were a bit pessimistic last year, so they predicted, I think it was about 1% contraction, and we got naught. So by the same token, maybe if we're lucky, we'll get just over 1% growth this year. This idea of going long to let the economy grow and make people feel better, not buying it, because it's not going to. People are not going to notice 1% growth, especially when we've got a government that are specifically going around everyone, ordinary people, and going, oh, you've made a bit more money? Yeah, we'll have that off you. So they're deliberately keeping people's living standards down. People are not going to feel better, even if the economy grows a bit this year. It's not going to grow enough for it to trickle down to people. The only, then there's all the issues of the standards controls we're starting to bring in. Even though I say we're not going to actually carry out checks properly, they're going to be like a token, we've still got the certification needed. So we're still making it harder for EU businesses now to export to Britain. So there's going to be issues with supply chains. Over summer, the channel crossings, what if they go up? The Conservatives aren't actually doing anything about them. Even if they got their Rwanda plan and not Rwandan refugees, say from Afghanistan, sent to Rwanda, even if their planes took off, it will have zero impact on channel crossings. And, their latest scam is to try, scheme, should we say? Let's not be too cruel. Their latest scheme is to pay Albanian TikTokers to persuade would-be refugees from Albania not to come to Britain because there's actually a good chance you're going to end up in Rwanda. Now, I would suggest those people are more likely to go, oh, let's check this out. And if they try and check it out, they'll find out actually there's virtually no chance of being sent to Rwanda. So it's not going to make any difference, if indeed it ever would, if they believed it. So then, what if channel crossings go up? They're just, at the moment, they're crapping themselves because of Reform UK. Well, that just plays into Reform UK's hands. Reform UK they're already in a position where they can brandish the latest net migration figures as a record, right? A record. They'll ignore the Brexit impact. So they'll just say the Tories are failing. If they can then post, oh, channel numbers are up. If the forecast at any point in 2024, if even the forecast, the trajectory is for more channel crossings this year than last year, then the Tories are toast, absolute toast. And so it's an absolute nonsense. And then the final coup de grace, I mean, there's several other things I've probably forgotten to say as well, but so I don't ramble on forever. The final coup de grace is that Rishi Sunak I don't know what's going on in terms of potential rebellions. It seems to me that the far right are still too divided to really take Sunak down. However, Sunak is not making any efforts to get people on his side. I mean, I saw an article in the Times suggesting, and it was trying to lay it on thick, trying to suggest that, up to 20 Tory MPs now believe there's no other way than to replace the leader. And it's like, 20 is pathetic. And up to 20 means a maximum of 20. It might not even be 20. That's pathetic. 20 Tory MPs cannot do anything to Sunak. There's not enough of them to call for a vote of no confidence. There's certainly not enough to replace him. There's not even enough to defeat him, his legislation in the House of Commons. Like, Sunak's big test, if there is going to be election in May, his last big test is the budget. Will his MPs vote for the budget? Because budgets are always a confidence issue. If you lose a budget, that is always seen as a confidence issue. But there we go. We cannot have unending growth. No, indeed. No, that's exactly it. Because you're comparing yourself with yourself. If you think about some level of productivity, and I know you can't compare it to a person, but even of a country, there's going to come a point where some economic headwinds hit you and some businesses go under because certain conditions, trading conditions, either domestically or usually, see, that's the nonsense of it. If you're going to end up in a recession, if you want to judge to what extent it's the government's fault, I mean, first of all, pay attention to how soon the government came in. I mean, technically, if we'd have had an election last November and Labour had come in and we'd still cop for the recession, you won't blame that on Labour because they've only just come in. So, but if the government's been in for a while, what I would suggest, I'm not an economist, of course, but what I would suggest is look at what the causes of it were. If the causes were international, nothing you could really do about it, then you'd say it's just one of those things. If it was entirely domestic, and this was domestic, we've made it, I keep going on, we've made it harder to trade. We've made it harder for businesses to hire staff. We've made it harder for people to find work. The fact that the NHS waiting lists have shot up to they went up to about 8 million. It's come down a little bit, but it's still higher than it was when Sunak took over. Some of those people are retired, right? So no real impact on GDP. Some of those people are part of our workforce. So if they're ill or injured, they cannot be up to full productivity, right? My partner's brother-in-law, for example, has just broken his arm. So he's going to be off work. Now, how long he's off work depends on how effective the treatment is. So is he going to get, is he just going to be patched up and then left to it? Or is he going to get the physiotherapy or whatever? So how quickly you can heal someone determines how quickly you can get up to productivity. If you've got a lot of the workforce off ill, then, that's going to hurt your productivity. And all of that is domestic. That's not international. The fact that Rishi Sunak squeezed the poorest, he's allowing, remember, I did a video on this recently. he's allowed people like British Gas, including their sort of umbrella organisation Centrica, but large corporations to make massive profits, whilst at the same time, those companies are charging people extra. So British Gas charging people way more for energy than they were a few years ago, and yet they've increased their profits by 943% in 1 year. And what's the impact of that? We might be able to get some extra tax out of those profits, but they're very good at like making out they've had loads of losses, aren't they? But because ordinary people are having to pay way more for energy, that means they've got less to spend elsewhere in the economy. So you're hurting businesses, smaller businesses in the local area. It's all nonsense. Yeah, I did see your comment earlier. I'll just throw this in the mix. I don't do collaborations. In the sense that YouTubers understand the term collaborations, I don't do them. I don't see the point in them. They're just silly. Sometimes people recommend them. I don't recommend them at all. I think they're ridiculous. But there we go. As I say, Phil, all the chickens coming home to roost this year makes dragging out the general election strategic madness. I mean, it's really this simple. Think about Rishi Sunak. Think about any Tory, right? At the moment, they're in a hole. Rishi Sunak is only interested in the money. Whatever Rishi Sunak is going to be able to steal this year is going to be announced in the budget. There's nothing else to do. The India trade deal was the only thing making me think there's a reason to hang on. But when I was saying that a few months ago, I was failing to take into account that the Indian general elections are basically starting not next month, from April. So they have their general election in May. So their campaign kicks off in April. As soon as that happens, there's no political, like, I don't pay a lot of attention to Indian politics, but I know a couple of people who do, and know some business people in India. And the view seems to be in India, they're not that bothered. But if they're going to get a trade deal with the UK at all, they want those visas, basically. They want the enhanced visas. That's what they want. They're not really bothered about anything else. They're not really bothered about us. I mean, they're a service economy. All the big business people lobbying Modi, it's a service industry. They're not really manufacturers. There's not many manufacturers, and the ones who are there are just, they're not that bothered either. That's the impression I get from people who do pay attention to what's going on in India. So Modi, yeah, he wouldn't mind a trade deal with the UK to bandy about for the general election. Sure, it's useful to him. But it doesn't seem to me that it's useful to him after the election. So once the election campaign's begun, he can't do anything anyway. And afterwards, it's no use to him. So basically, Sunak has got... So if Sunak has the election in May the 2nd, that's fine. In terms of like making himself as wealthy as possible, that's fine. The only argument for Sunak to delay himself beyond then is if he thought he could win later on, but not now. Well, that's not the case. He's never going to win. So, there it is. Do I agree the simplest options for the UK government would be to screen illegal immigrants for jobs to improve economic productivity and tax the rich? Nothing's ever simple, of course, when it comes to immigration. So let's go through the immigration idea first. So a lot of anti-immigration people, a lot of what we call the gammons, keep moaning. There's some of them of the view that these illegal immigrants, as they call them, come in here and they took our jobs. They're not actually allowed to work. People claiming asylum are not allowed to work. There's two conditions you have to meet as an asylum seeker to be able to work. First of all, you have to have been in the process of claiming asylum for 12 months and it not be your fault it's taken this long, right? So in other words, because of this massive backlog we have, if you end up being in like limbo for 12 months and your claim's still not taken care of and it's not your fault, it's the government's fault, then you can seek work if it's a job on the shortage occupation list, I believe. So it has to be a specific type of job as well. So in theory, if we had a qualified nurse seeking asylum from, say, Afghanistan, and they'd been here for 12 months, they would be allowed, and it's not their fault, they would be allowed to then seek work. So what you'd be talking about is a change of that policy. Now, changing the policy, I am in favour of it because we have shortages. Politically, it could be tricky, particularly for the Conservatives, maybe less so for Labour, because then it's more, because remember, in their minds, they're illegal immigrants. They're not really seeking asylum, they're just playing it on. And until you've processed their claims, there's no way of saying to these people, no, these are genuine. So that's what they think. And if you then allow them to work, those people are just think, they're just coming here as economic migrants. And it makes a political mess. And it sort of creates another angle for the likes of Nigel Farage. So that's the political difficulty with it, even though economically it would make a whole heap of sense. But the solution, to my mind, is rather than letting asylum seekers work whilst their claims are being processed, I would say process their claims a bit more bloody quickly. I know it's not always really quick. You're talking about people who've, if they're genuine, as most are, they've had to flee somewhere, they may not have all the documentation. Or, I mean, it was quite hard for me to get into the Labour Party conference last year because you had to have this ID and this ID, and because I didn't have a passport, all this various ID. So you imagine an asylum seeker who had to flee in the night and doesn't have a great deal of anything. Yes, you can imagine it's not possible to do someone's asylum claim in like a week. But as long as you are managing to process first of all, get ahead of the claims procedures. And then once you've got the number of claimants in the system down to a manageable level, make sure you're processing them at the same rate they're coming here to apply. Then there isn't a big issue. There isn't a big issue. In terms of tax the rich, that is, again, all the political difficulty. If you think about inheritance tax as a classic case, because that's not only a tax on the rich, it's a wealth tax, a literal wealth tax. And the reason why it's a political hot potato is because there's only like 4% of the population will pay it, but there's about 30 odd percent. I can't remember exactly what it was. YouGov did some polling last year, and it's about 30 odd percent, over a third of people. I think it was a good third. I think it was properly, I think it was like 37 or something percent of people think they will be eligible for inheritance tax. So you've got this so if you talk about taxing the rich, there are a lot of people who think that means them when it won't. And it's really hard to say otherwise when the mainstream media are just going to tell you it means you, right? So increasing the rate of any tax or creating a new tax is politically tricky. But what Labour and what any government should do is we'd suddenly have much higher tax revenues if people just paid their tax, because there are a lot of people getting out of paying tax. So we talk about income tax, and you've got your different rates. You've got your 20% rate, your 40% rate, your 45% rate, right? But there's lots of very wealthy people who are not paying it all because they say they do some fiddle where in actual fact they like take a loan from their business. Well, because it's a loan, you don't pay tax on it. But really so there's lots of fiddles to get out of paying taxes, which shouldn't be allowed. We need to sort out tax avoidance, cost of buildings. Yeah, tax avoidance, closing loopholes, tax evasion, the actual illegal stuff as well. Basically, what I would do immediately, I would increase the number of tax inspectors. I don't know how much you can do in a certain amount. You can't just like go, oh, let's just treble it, because you need them training up and things like that. And you can't just obviously, if you need training up, you need current tax inspectors to train them up. But over time, increase the number of tax inspectors. And I know Rachel Reeves is very hot on trying to close loopholes down. According to people who know her, she's been spending a lot of time trying to research best practice, what's worked in other countries for closing tax loopholes. But we certainly need a lot of this. Yes, that is how we do it. So in terms of immigration, I would say the way you stick on the right side of the public politically is just process the claims more quickly. Because do you know what as well? Because not all claimants are successful. We have about a quarter that aren't. Well, do you know what Labour can do? If they start processing the claims more quickly, or they get more people on the job, right? They can not only get the successful claimants into work, boosting our economy, they can also be deporting the unsuccessful claimants more quickly. And do you know what Labour can do after its first year? They can boast about how they've increased the number of asylum seekers that have been deported. If they want to play to the gammons, they can say, the Tories in their last year deported this many, we've deported this many. You play the game. In terms of taxing the rich, just make sure more pay their normal rate. Because, here's us thinking, and you see, the obvious thing there would be capital gains, but they're not going to. We know that Labour are not going to increase the rate of any tax because they've said so. Google, Amazon, Starbucks need to pay tax. Yes, absolutely 100%. Because this is what happens. And it happened under the last Labour government as well. What happens is this corporation meets with HMRC, right? They're going to have a meeting with HMRC, who have been given their guidance by the government. And then, the Starbucks or Facebook or whoever says, we don't really want to pay a lot of tax. We generate a lot of jobs. That's worth it. So you're getting loads of money from the income tax we're paying to the employees. I mean, first of all, I would say, well, not all of you are paying very well, but it doesn't matter. It's like, no, you're going to pay your tax properly. And what are they going to do? Are they going to leave the country? Is Facebook or Meta or whatever the hell going to shut down in the UK? I've not a problem with that because Facebook's is shite. Starbucks, I don't like coffee, so if I was the Prime Minister, I wouldn't care about that either. There is not a single, the only one that's maybe a bit would be Amazon, because Google wouldn't actually shut down. Be stupid. Who would do that? Amazon wouldn't realistically either, but Amazon can probably scare people more. I don't think Starbucks or Facebook can. But that is the danger. That's what they do. They'll threaten to go to the media. And the media, remember, the media backs the corporations. So the media will say, oh, Labour are on this course and you won't have Facebook anymore. So that's the danger of it. But at the same time, I would call their bluff. I would 100%. I would go out to the public. I'd do a speech. If there was a load of stuff in the paper, I would do a speech saying they're not going to leave because we're only going to tax them. And I would actually say to them, some of these companies are paying less tax than you are as an individual, and that's not right. And they're not going to leave because why would they? They're still we're not going to tax all their profits. We're just going to make sure they pay the same rate as ordinary people. Make it like almost a populist statement. Why should wealthy people pay less tax than ordinary people? It sounds like Labour needs to get its rich supporters to invest in electronic media mouthpieces. Well, Labour should. Labour certainly should. They can't be asked. They don't understand social media. That's the problem. Need to end PFI contracts. They just don't work. Yes, I would agree with that. It would be very interesting to see exactly what, because I know, they've got their policies on their website. But like any policies, they're largely about the outcomes, what they're wanting to achieve. There is some process in there, but not as much on some things as well. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how they do it. Why are we not running adverts on high immigration countries saying we're not open for non-asylum seekers? I'm not sure what that means, sorry. Why are we not running adverts? I'm not running adverts. DK say I've dumped Facebook. I mean, I sort of largely have. I mean, occasionally someone like my dad's contacted me on Facebook tonight. Bloody hell. Keep trying to tell him it's shit. But anyway. I don't like coffee, so I'm all right with Starbucks leaving the country. What sort of reason is that? Perfectly good reason. Coffee's rubbish. But what I'm saying is that they wouldn't leave anyway. Because if you, let's say you've got a business and you're making X amount of profit, right? Now, if the government comes and says, well, we want to reduce that a little bit, are you going to leave the country? Because it's not like leaving the country says, oh, well, I'll just pump our resources somewhere else and make more money there. Because it's like, no, you're everywhere. Starbucks is everywhere. Every country that will allow a Starbucks has a Starbucks, right? And it has it everywhere. So, and I'm not sure there are too many countries that don't. Probably is what, China and North Korea? They're probably the only countries that don't have Starbucks. But they're not actually going to leave. So you could even still give them special rates. You know, you could do it bit by bit rather than say, no, you're paying your tax properly. Just increase the amount of tax, but substantially. Increase the amount of tax they pay. So they're still making massive profits, but it's like, yeah, this is a piss take. Think how much the world will improve when Murdoch finally goes to the underworld. The thing is, though, I mean, he's knocking on death's door, isn't he, surely? But there's others as well now. I mean, he's built up his empire. I don't know what that his children are quite as evil as he is, but the empire's still there and there'll still be horrible people running it, as well as everyone else. How could they end PFI other than paying them off up front? You just basically reduce your new ones. You ultimately can't. And Labour won't pay them off and just deal with it because that wouldn't make sense anyway, economic sense. But you'll just have to, you just sort of agree that it wasn't a great idea in the first place and not do more of it. I'll tell you the danger, though, is that arguably the pressure to do it is greater now. Because ultimately, what is PFI? It's a bit like getting a car loan, isn't it? So that you can have it, and you can't quite afford to get it now. So you're going to pay more over the long term, but you can have it now. When you've got a knackered economy, that sort of sounds quite appealing, doesn't it? So we will see. You know, Labour's position is that they will increase insourcing of the NHS, for example. So we'll see. If I don't like coffee, do I like tea? No, don't like hot drinks. The only time I have hot drinks is if I've got a sore throat. And then it's hot like lemon squash or something like that. Reduce income by 20% or by 100%, that's the question. That is exactly it. No business, like, yeah, good way of putting it. If you sort of say, right, your profits, shall we say, your post-tax profits are currently an amount. So we'll call that 100%. We want to reduce it to 80%. No company's going to go, oh, we might as well shut up then. Because that's particularly a massive multi-billion dollar industry. It's never happening. And yeah, no corporation is going to leave because they're going to make $1 billion instead of $2 billion. I mean, I wouldn't even say to begin with you do it that savagely. I would say, you know, you can, because you can. I mean, what they need to, I go back to this. They just need to close a load of loopholes. Close loopholes, stop them being able to claim losses that don't exist. Send in tax inspectors as well. Send in tax inspectors to go over everything. Say, that's not happening. You're not doing that. You can't claim for that. Do it properly. Graham Hughes wants to send the tax collectors into Eton. That'll be a good laugh. And they should do that as well, by the way. They should send in the tax collectors to the big public schools. I'll sort them out. Because they're fiddling their taxes like Billy O. Businesses don't mind paying more tax. It means healthy and better skilled workers. It's the same as people. People don't mind paying more tax for a better standard of living. In Scandinavian countries, the rate of tax is very high, but so is the standard of living. People don't object to it. Sweden's consistently ranked highly as a good place for business by the World Trade Organization, yes. PFI is a mortgage to pay for 30 years of cleaning. Well, yeah. I mean, honestly, the cleaning thing is the one that always gets me because it's the most visible. It's the most visible face palm in the NHS. You know, it's what I notice straight away. Whenever you go into a hospital, you just notice. And when I had a hospital stay a few years ago, you just notice it. This cleaner came in and just stroked the floor with this thing that strokes floors. Few minutes and she was gone again. And she did it the next day. Now, I remember when my mum was a nurse, when I was really small, and she'd take me in because with no childcare, so she'd take me in, and I would just play in the children's area while she was doing her shift, right? And you saw cleaners, and they cleaned, and the whole place was really spick and span. This would have been in the early 80s. It was spick and span. Whereas now, they're actually filthy. Hospitals are actually dirty. So you're paying more, and you're not even getting the service. So again, like my attitude, if I were in Labour's position, my attitude would be to force them to deliver what the service they're supposed to be delivering. So a bit like Labour have already said with water companies, they're going to force them to deliver the service. And if they don't, they're going to face penalties. Do the same. And part of me is thinking they might do this, but I would certainly say do the same to all sorts of contracts for either, basically what we call public contracts, right? All of them. Be really tight. It's like, you reckon you can deliver this service more efficiently than having it in-house? Right, deliver the service then. New Labour's PFI scheme was a terrible mistake. I absolutely agree. Yes. In the US, we have minimum alternative tax that's required for high-income earners. Apply that to the businesses. And it would eliminate most of the tax dodging schemes. Isn't that, I don't know, I'm not actually familiar with that. That sounds like a corporation tax to me, or capital gains tax. Is it like a capital gains tax? I might have to look that up then. But we'll see. I mean, one thing I am sure of is that Labour, although they keep saying you can't just you can't just spend your way to growth. You can't spend your way to growth. It's like, okay, but you do need to spend to get growth. You especially need to, I mean, you need to spend just to maintain things. Like, we're not going to get economic growth without a decent transport network, without decent housing, without decent healthcare, without decent education. You're not going to get growth, right? We also need to be able to spend on defence. We need to be able to spend on policing. We need to be able to spend on the criminal justice system, because all of those things help people to feel safe as well. So you cannot get growth without investment. But at the moment, it's not even like spending to maintain. We need to build up again. So there will be spending. And despite what Labour are only saying what they're saying at the moment because they're trying to stop the Tories saying they're just going to borrow heavily. That was why they had that green investment U-turn that a number of people clearly didn't like. And it's all about making it clear they're not going to borrow and load up the future generations with loads of debt, right? So, but they need the money. And if they feel hamstrung on the borrowing front, then the only way is to raise tax revenues. And if you can't raise tax revenues by raising the rate of tax, because you can't, because people are taxed to the hilt, then the only way is to make more people pay the tax they're supposed to be. Closing loopholes is ultimately what Labour are going to have to do. So it doesn't matter, I keep saying it doesn't matter whether people believe that Labour wants to or not, they have to. If they don't grow the economy, if they cannot show that they're doing much better, because if they grow the economy a little bit better than average, the Tories will just say, oh, but we just put all that in place. You're benefiting from our plan. So Labour have to actually have the economy really take off at some point. They'll get away with it for a few years, but they really need to generate growth. And that means investment immediately in order for it to filter through. And yes, they'll be able to generate some growth by lowering trade barriers that were raised artificially high by the Tories. But, we all know ultimately we need to be back in the single market and customs union. And that's not going to be happening in the next parliament. Some things should not be for profit. So for me, it's essential public services. Things that are necessary should not be for profit. Other things you can do without, don't mind. Don't mind that at all. Frank's saying it's different. They don't have the time just like in hotels. But what was that about? I might have missed that, sorry. Gail saying the contracts of PFI were already in place by 97. New Labour couldn't get rid of them. I wouldn't take that line. Tony Blair was a big fan of them, and the fact that he issued plenty of them during his time in power. No, I don't think. Just because it was already happening, doesn't mean that that Labour at the time were not fans of them. They didn't have to carry on with them. They would have had to honour the ones that were already in place, but they didn't have to carry on. Did I see the FT article about Labour now saying they'll modernise the non-dom states instead of fully removing it? Do you know, I haven't read that article yet. No, I am aware of it, so I haven't not seen that at all. But modernising the non-dom status to me sounds like getting rid of it. So I had seen something of it. I do need to check that out. Hopefully, again, that's just another case of not spooking the horses for the election. And it's like, there's no justification for non-dom status. It's not, you don't even have it in America, for goodness sake. It does not even exist in the capital of capitalism. So, yeah. Biden's been an underrated president. Inflation Reduction Act, stroke of genius. Yeah, I'm incredibly impressed by Biden. Unfortunately, a lot of politics is perception. And he has the perception of being like your sort of senile old grandpa. That is the problem with Biden. Give it 3 years, we'll have a Norway-style deal with the EU. I really don't think it was 3 years. But I am looking forward to a change in narrative during the next Parliament. Labour are not going to be able to maintain the position. I don't think they even want to, but they're not going to be able to maintain the position they have now in a few years' time. I don't think it's going to be day after the election. I don't think this is how it's going to work out. Keir Starmer goes to the palace, has to form a government, and then speaking at the steps of Downing Street says, right, Brexit's a load of bollocks, isn't it? But they're going to move. They're going to have to move. I mean, they'll put the focus anyway. It makes sense to put the focus on the Tory Brexit, as if there's a different type of Brexit. But the narrative will have to change. Labour MPs, for a start, will start asking questions. Because at the moment, they're asking those questions of Rishi Sunak. They'll be asking them of Keir Starmer. What happens if Labour in power and World War III starts? Well, just, you know what? I mean, it's like anything. You know, World War III or just another big financial crash. Anything like, do you know what? Can we just have a little bit of respite? Can we just do that? The 20s has been the 2020s has been as bad as the 1920s. Can we not? But it does worry me if Labour are in and then pretty much straight away there is some god-awful event which throws everything out. It's like, can we just have a period of stability? Can we not just have that? Oh, Aubrey said, minimum alternative tax is a means of offsetting tax deductions for corporations with incomes above a certain level. I don't want them offsetting it. But I don't know. Again, it's one of these, I'm not informing Labour. They're not listening to me, and they shouldn't listen to me. I'm not an economist, for goodness sake. We'll just have to see what happens. But they are going to have to raise more taxes. You know, they can't generate enough investment just by cutting out the crony contracts. That will help. Or chasing down fraud, that will help. But ultimately, they need tax revenues to increase. If we want our economy to increase, our tax revenues have to increase first. There is, actually, it is a chicken and an egg. People always use the term chicken and egg to mean, oh, we don't know which way around it goes. We do know which way around it goes. The egg came first, then the chicken. It's really simple. And the same thing happens here. The investment has to come first. Yes, there are things you can do with legislation to generate economic growth. There are the fact that Labour, for example, are going to get business leaders, union leaders, and other stakeholders involved in decision making is going to help, right? I'm a big fan of devolving a lot of decision making regionally as well, but I don't think that will help in the short term because you'll still end up with dumb-ass decisions being made. What was the dumbest thing Tony Blair ever did? PFI's, Iraq, or something else? For me, not instigating proportional representation, not bringing in electoral reform. Yeah, that was the biggest thing for this country. You know, you could argue Iraq made a hell of a mess for lots of other people outside of the country. So I could go with that one. But I would say not bringing in serious electoral reform. Absolute madness to think he would keep the Tories out forever. Stupidity. Conceit, really. Arrogance. What timescale do I envisage Brexit changing in roughly? I do not think that, well, what Labour, just like the Tories wanted to be able to show their Brexit successors. Labour will want to as well. Now, in terms of timescale, there's one major factor that needs to be known, and that is who wins the presidential election this year. I don't know whether people have noticed, I did it in my short today. There was someone writing for The Telegraph, which is a pro-Brexit paper, and this is from a Brexiteer's point of view. And they were saying Brexit supporters had better pray that Biden wins. Because if Trump wins, we all know what's going to happen. America is going to basically pull out of Europe. Unless someone has a lot of influence with Trump and persuades him otherwise, America's going to pull out. And Europe then has to take over supporting Ukraine. Now, there's all sorts of things there. First of all, the UK is going to have to start with, because what this Brexiteer was arguing is, if Trump becomes president, it will force the UK to have a much, much closer relationship with Brussels, they were saying, which it will. It absolutely will. At the moment, I'd still say, you know, Labour have made it clear that they want that much stronger relationship anyway. But if America is no longer a suitable ally, and European security is absolutely under threat, and Trump may not care or realise, but everyone here does on this continent. So you've got a major thing there. So something like that would accelerate the reversal of Brexit. It would have to. Not necessarily rejoining the EU, but much closer alignment. And in actual fact, I've said before, like, Keir Starmer wants to negotiate some lowering of trade barriers with the EU. Now, this is great, and this is very different to the current Conservative government, of course. However, it's a two-way process. The EU has to agree, and people will point out, I point out, any negotiation is a case of, oh, you want us to give you this? What do we get in return? And at the moment, like, Labour can't really do anything like that. Can you lower your trade barriers to us, please? What are you going to do for us? Well, we'll lower ours to you. They're already quite low. They're already lower than ours. So you've got limited scope. In an isolated trade negotiation, we don't really have anything. We don't have any leverage with the EU. We don't have anything to trade with them, right? Whereas and I'd said this a long time ago, and then either Starmer or Lammy said it last year. The EU aren't happy about it, but, you know, don't matter. I'd suggested what they need to do, because we don't have any trade leverage, but we do have leverage on security grounds. Although the Tories have done their best to hollow out our military, we still do have a military, and you're better than most in Europe. So when it comes to European security is a major issue. Labour do actually, if they insist that security and trade negotiations take place in parallel, then there can be trade-offs there. So this time when Labour say, can you lower your trade barriers to us? What do you do in return? We will match them, and we will, you know, do whatever in terms of security arrangements. Now, if Trump becomes president, European security becomes a way, way bigger issue. Way bigger issue, at which point the UK's hand becomes stronger. That is not to say I'm hoping for a Trump election, by the way. It's not worth it. It's just that there are silver linings. Do I think that Liz Truss and Popcorn care about Ukraine? No, Joss. They don't. Why would people who don't even care about their own country care about a different country? They don't care in the slightest. Boris Johnson doesn't care in the slightest. You know, it just suits them. They know it's popular with the public, and they are populists. What do populists do? They try to associate themselves with what's popular. You know, if they could convince a lot of popular actors and pop stars and so on to come along to their meetings, they would do that. I mean, what did Tony Blair do when he first entered Downing Street? We had that Cool Britannia wave, didn't he? Where he invited a load of the biggest stars in the country to Downing Street for a drinks reception. Load of bollocks. But it's what you do as a politician. You associate yourself with what is popular with the public. You try and... That's why you honour people. That's why governments give knighthoods and OBEs and things like that to popular people. You know, that is why... what's his face? Tom, the army chap who did the walk-in during the coronavirus thing. Sir Tom, as he became. That's why he was knighted. He wasn't knighted because he walked around his garden. He was knighted because he wasn't knighted for the money he raised either. It was money that was raised that shouldn't needed to be raised. He was knighted because he was popular. And the government wanted to leech off that popularity. His family aren't so popular these days, are they? Noel Gallagher told Blair to F off to his face at one of those dudes. Well, that's normal for him. That's how he says hello, isn't it? The Gallagher brothers, or the two main Gallagher brothers anyway. That's just how they say hello. They'd probably be quite friendly. We now don't have an army. We've got fewer than 100,000. We've now got a defence force. Well, it's not even much of a defence force if we can't actually set sail with our ships because there's not enough crew. I mean, we had 2 ships crash into each other recently. We had another ship that couldn't set off for NATO exercises because we wouldn't crew it, I think, was the last one, wasn't it? Swedish way of having a military is saying that we're pacifists and run around with free hug signs. UK could always consider that option. No, ultimately, you know, countries should have a military and they should maintain decent defence spending. If Trump has shown anything, it is the folly of relying on other countries to defend you. But at the same time, it certainly wouldn't be sensible for a country the size of the UK to adopt that policy. Chickens evolved from dinosaurs which were already laying eggs. I don't mean the egg as a concept came before the chicken. I mean the chicken egg. But obviously the parents of the first chicken were not chickens. Otherwise they'd be the first chickens, wouldn't they? So chickens definitely come from eggs, otherwise it wouldn't be a chicken. So the chicken egg had to come before the chicken. And eggs in general, even as a concept, definitely had to come before chicken because, as you say, species that predate chickens had eggs. But anyway, the friends of Russia were locked in tight with Kerry, Cummins and Johnson. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was trying to convince someone. Well, I wasn't trying to convince. You can't convince anyone on Twitter. It's impossible. And they weren't obnoxious or anything. But, you know, I tried, because they were convinced that Boris Johnson's this great enemy of Putin. It's like, no, he's not. He's a Russian agent. He's a Russian asset. Well, he's not anymore because he's not useful to them anymore. But he has been. They will 100% have taken embarrassing footage of him, recorded embarrassing footage of him when he was at that party in Italy with Russian agents, including a literal colonel of the KGB. But anyway. Yeah, we can only crew a third of our naval fleet. I mean, it's absolute. I mean, it is. It does my head in when people will think, "Oh, the Tories are good with the economy." It's like, no, they're not. They're absolutely dreadful with the economy. Oh, the Tories are good on law and order. No, they aren't. Crime has gone up. Detection rates have gone down. Prosecutions have gone down. Oh, they're really good on defence. They've hollowed out our military. It's embarrassing now. We've even got people on the right wing writing in the media that they're embarrassed by it. It's embarrassing for everyone. But it should be embarrassing for the people who support the Tories because they did it. It didn't just happen. It didn't just randomly happen. It happened because the first thing David Cameron did, the very first thing he did was to scrap a military project. We were building some planes or something. I can't remember what it was. It might have been ships. There was some major military hardware being built, and David Cameron just scrapped the project. Not paying for that. And it started from there and it carried on. Lowest common denominator politics produces the lowest common denominator of governments. Indeed, and that's what we've got now, which is where I go back to my beginning thing on Esther McVeigh. You know, someone like that can be in the cabinet who can actually say, Rishi Sunak, because she's using the old lines, because that's the lines they were trying to plug a few days ago, up to a few days ago. We've turned a corner. The economy's turned a corner. We're in recession. So they can't use it again until mid-May when they can go, oh, look, the economy's turned a corner. We're out of recession. You know, whose fault was it in recession in the first place? Because they can't point to anything global that caused this recession. The recession happened effectively in the latter half of last year. We've learnt about it now, but it happened in the latter half of last year. What happened in the world in the latter half of last year to cause it? Nothing. Nothing spectacular happened. You know, the Russian war in Ukraine has gone quagmire. You know, they're not going to blame it on Israel and Palestine, for goodness sake, are they? That's ridiculous. I mean, nothing happened. In fact, what happened last year is the global economy grew better than expected. So although I say we were expected to contract slightly, we ended up with no growth, as if Sunak's done something clever. No, the global economy did better than expected. So we didn't. We only did slightly better by ending up with a recession at the end of the year. But anyway, there it is. We'll have to leave it there. We've gone well over there. I mean, Phil, the economy did turn a corner just in the opposite direction to what they wanted. Well, I don't know what they want. I don't think they care. They don't care what happens to the economy. They just care what happens to their own personal finances. But yeah, we'll call it there. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a very good evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.